In a small, quiet town surrounded by thick forests and gentle hills, there lived a girl named Emily. She was 16 years old, with soft brown hair that fell just past her shoulders and wide, thoughtful eyes that often seemed lost in thought. Emily wasn't like the other kids in her school. While her classmates laughed and joked during lunch breaks, she preferred sitting alone under a tree, reading books or sketching pictures in a worn-out notebook. To most people, she appeared shy, maybe even a little strange. But those who truly knew her understood that Emily's silence came from pain that no one else could see. Emily lived with her parents and two older siblings in a modest house at the edge of town. From the outside, their home looked like any other: a white picket fence, flower beds along the driveway, and curtains fluttering gently in the breeze. But behind those walls, things were far from perfect. Her parents argued constantly, their voices rising late into the night until Emily would press her pillow over her ears to block out the noise. Sometimes the arguments turned physical, though. Emily tried not to watch. Instead, she'd retreat to her room, clutching her grandmother's locket tightly in her hand as if it could shield her from the chaos. Her siblings weren't much help either. Both older than her, they had long since stopped trying to intervene in their parents' fights. Instead, they spent most of their time avoiding the house altogether, hanging out with friends or working part-time jobs. Emily felt invisible in her own family, as though she didn't matter to anyone. The loneliness gnawed at her day after day, growing heavier with each passing year. One evening, when the sky outside was painted orange and pink with the setting sun, Emily sat on her bed staring at the locket in her palm. It was a simple silver pendant shaped like a heart, engraved with tiny flowers along its edges. Inside was a faded photograph of her grandmother, smiling warmly as if nothing in the world could hurt her. Emily loved that locket more than anything. It was the only thing she owned that made her feel safe. That night, however, it wasn't comfort she felt, but anger. Anger at her parents for ignoring her, anger at her siblings for leaving her behind, and anger at herself for being too weak to change anything. As the hours ticked by, Emily's mind began to wander. She thought about running away, not just leaving the house for a few hours, but disappearing completely. The idea terrified her, but it also excited her in a way she couldn't explain. For once, she imagined what it might feel like to be free, to escape the suffocating grip of her unhappy life and start fresh somewhere new. By the time midnight rolled around, her thoughts had solidified into a plan. Quietly, Emily slipped out of bed and opened the top drawer of her dresser. She pulled out an old backpack and started filling it with essentials: a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, some snacks she'd saved from school lunches, and the locket. Then, she grabbed a pen and paper and wrote a short note. "I'm sorry," it read. "I can't stay here anymore." She hesitated before folding the note and placing it on her pillow, unsure whether anyone would even notice she was gone. The hardest part was climbing out of her bedroom window. Her hands trembled as she gripped the sill, and her breath came in shallow gasps as she lowered herself onto the ground below. Once outside, she paused for a moment, looking back at the house where she'd grown up. The windows were dark, and the air was eerily still. Taking a deep breath, Emily turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the night. She didn't know where she was going, or how she would survive. All she knew was that she couldn't go back. As she trudged down the empty streets, her sneakers making soft crunching sounds against the gravel, Emily felt a strange mix of fear and relief wash over her. Fear because she was stepping into the unknown, and relief because, for the first time in years, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. Over the next few days, Emily hitchhiked rides with strangers, careful not to trust anyone too easily. She slept in bus stations, abandoned buildings, and sometimes under the stars when the weather was warm enough. Hunger became a constant companion, but she learned quickly how to stretch every penny she earned from odd jobs washing dishes or cleaning floors. Slowly but surely, she put distance between herself and the town she once called home. Meanwhile, back in the house with the white picket fence, panic began to set in. When Emily's mother knocked on her door early the next morning, expecting to wake her for breakfast, she found the note lying on the neatly made bed. At first, disbelief clouded her face, followed swiftly by guilt and then rage. How dare Emily leave without saying anything? Didn't she realize how worried they'd all be? Her father called the police immediately, and soon the entire town was buzzing with news of the missing teenager. Search parties scoured the woods, flyers were posted on every street corner, and local news stations broadcast appeals for information. But despite everyone's efforts, Emily remained elusive. Days turned into weeks, and eventually months passed without a single clue about her whereabouts. People began to whisper among themselves, speculating about what might have happened to her. Some believed she'd been kidnapped, others thought she'd met with foul play. Only a handful dared to entertain the possibility that she'd left on purpose, and that she didn't intend to come back. Years went by, and Emily's name faded from conversations. Life in the town resumed its usual rhythm, though her family never fully recovered from her disappearance. Her parents grew quieter, their arguments replaced by a heavy, unspoken sadness. Her siblings moved away, building lives of their own while secretly wondering if they'd ever hear from their little sister again. Yet, deep down, none of them truly gave up hope. Somewhere out there, Emily was alive, and someday, somehow, she might return. Unbeknownst to them, Emily had indeed built a new life for herself. Far from the rolling hills and dense forests of her childhood, she settled in a bustling city where no one knew her name. There she changed her identity, becoming Sarah to those around her. She worked hard, made friends cautiously, and even fell in love with a kind man named Jack. Together they raised 2 children, creating a family filled with warmth and laughter, the kind of life Emily had always dreamed of having. But even as Sarah embraced this new chapter, fragments of her old life lingered in the corners of her mind. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the world outside was still, memories of her parents' shouting matches and lonely teenage years crept back in. She kept the locket hidden in a drawer, rarely taking it out but never letting it go. It was a reminder of where she came from and of the courage it took to leave everything behind. Little did Sarah, or Emily, know that fate had other plans for her story. 20 years after she vanished without a trace, a discovery in a dusty junkyard would set off a chain of events that would bring her past crashing back into her present, and this time there would be no escaping it. 20 years had passed since Emily disappeared from her hometown, leaving behind nothing but a note and unanswered questions. In those 2 decades, life moved forward for everyone, but not equally. For her family, the wound of her absence remained raw, even as they tried to rebuild their lives around it. Her parents aged visibly, their once strong frames now frail and bent under the weight of unresolved guilt. Her siblings, now adults with families of their own, often found themselves thinking about her late at night when the house was quiet. They wondered if she was happy, safe, or alive at all. Meanwhile, Emily, now Sarah, had carved out a new existence far away from the chaos of her childhood. She lived in a small apartment above a bakery in a bustling city, where the scent of fresh bread wafted through her windows every morning. Her husband, Jack, worked as a mechanic, his hands calloused but gentle. Together they raised 2 children, Lily, a bright-eyed 8-year-old who loved drawing, and Ben, a curious 5-year-old who asked endless questions about everything. To anyone who met them, they were an ordinary, loving family, untouched by tragedy or secrets. But beneath Sarah's calm exterior lay layers of suppressed memories. Though she rarely spoke of her past, certain triggers would send her spiraling back to moments she'd tried so hard to forget. The sound of raised voices always made her flinch, no matter how harmless the argument might be. Once, during a school play, Lily wore a dress that reminded Sarah so much of one her mother used to wear that she excused herself to the restroom, tears streaming down her face. Jack noticed these moments but never pressed her for answers. He respected her silence, though he couldn't help feeling there was more to his wife than she let on. Despite her efforts to bury her old identity, Sarah kept one tangible link to her former life, the locket her grandmother had given her. It stayed tucked away in a drawer, wrapped carefully in tissue paper. Occasionally, when the kids were asleep and Jack was engrossed in tinkering with some broken gadget, she'd take it out and hold it in her palm. Its cool metal surface felt grounding. like holding onto a piece of herself she couldn't afford to lose. Sometimes she'd open it and stare at the faded photograph inside, whispering softly, "I'm sorry." Back in her hometown, Detective Roberts sat alone in his cluttered office, staring at a corkboard covered in photographs, notes, and newspaper clippings. Now in his late 50s, Roberts had spent most of his career chasing leads and solving cases, but Emily's disappearance haunted him more than any other. There was something about her story, the quiet girl who vanished without a trace, that refused to let him go. Over the years, he'd revisited the case countless times, hoping for a breakthrough, but each attempt ended in disappointment. One rainy afternoon, just as Roberts was preparing to pack up his things and head home, a call came in from a junkyard owner named Gus. Gus explained that while clearing out a pile of scrap metal, he'd stumbled upon a cardboard box filled with old belongings. Among the items was a dusty photo album containing pictures of a young girl who looked strikingly similar to Emily. Intrigued, Roberts grabbed his coat and drove straight to the junkyard. The scene was chaotic: piles of discarded furniture, rusted car parts, and heaps of garbage stretched as far as the eye could see. Gus greeted him warmly and led him to the box, which sat atop a stack of tires. Inside, Roberts found a treasure trove of forgotten memories: faded Polaroids, ticket stubs, and handwritten letters tied neatly with string. But what caught his attention most was the album itself. Flipping through its pages, he saw snapshots of birthday parties, school events, and family gatherings, all frozen moments of a life long abandoned. Then, tucked into the front cover, he discovered a torn photograph taped carefully along its edges. It showed Emily standing beside her siblings, smiling brightly despite the tension evident in her eyes. On the back, someone had scribbled a date and the words, "Never forget me." Roberts's heart skipped a beat. After 20 years, this was the first tangible clue he'd uncovered that directly connected to Emily. Determined to follow the lead, Roberts questioned Gus about the box's origins. Gus explained that it had come from a storage unit auction held several months earlier. The unit belonged to a woman named Margaret Thompson, who had recently passed away after battling cancer. According to public records, Margaret had been a close friend of Emily's mother before drifting apart years ago. Could this connection mean something? Roberts returned to his office and began digging deeper into Margaret's life. He combed through old phone records, bank statements, and personal documents, searching for anything that might tie her to Emily. Eventually, he unearthed a faded envelope addressed to Emily, complete with a return address written in shaky handwriting. The address pointed to a small town hundreds of miles away, a place Roberts had never considered in his investigation. Excited by the possibility of finally cracking the case, Roberts presented his findings to his superiors. Though skeptical at first, they agreed to let him pursue the lead personally, recognizing the importance of closure, not just for Emily's family but for Roberts himself. With the photograph and envelope in hand, he set off on what he hoped would be his final journey to uncover the truth. As Roberts drove toward the distant town, his mind raced with possibilities. What if Emily really was alive? What if she didn't want to be found? And if she did, how would her family react after so many years apart? These questions weighed heavily on him, but he pushed them aside, focusing instead on the task ahead. Arriving in the unfamiliar town, Roberts immediately sensed its charm. Unlike the sprawling cities he was used to, this place exuded warmth and simplicity. Quaint shops lined the main street, and neighbors greeted each other by name. As he wandered through the streets, asking locals if they recognized Emily's name or face, he encountered a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Some claimed ignorance, others seemed reluctant to share information. Still, Roberts pressed on, driven by the belief that answers were within reach. It wasn't until he stopped at a park bench overlooking a playground that his luck changed. Sitting there, watching two children laugh and chase each other, was a woman whose features struck him as oddly familiar. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray, and fine lines framed her eyes, but there was no mistaking the resemblance. This was Emily, or rather Sarah. Approaching cautiously, Roberts introduced himself and showed her the photograph. At first, she froze, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by a flood of emotions. Tears welled up as she whispered, almost too softly to hear, "It's me. I'm Emily." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them crackled with unspoken words, 20 years of separation condensed into a single heartbeat. Finally, Roberts broke the silence. "We've been looking for you," he said gently. "Your family misses you." Sarah nodded, her voice trembling. "I know," she replied. "But I wasn't ready to go back. Not then. Maybe I am now." And with that, the pieces of Emily's fractured story began to fall into place, setting the stage for a reunion that would test the boundaries of forgiveness, love, and redemption. Detective Roberts sat across from Sarah, once Emily, at a small cafe in the heart of the town where she had built her new life. The air smelled faintly of coffee and freshly baked pastries, but neither of them touched their cups. Instead, they focused on the task at hand, unraveling 2 decades worth of secrets, pain, and unanswered questions. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she traced the edges of the photograph Roberts had shown her earlier. It was surreal to see herself so young, standing beside her siblings with a smile that masked the turmoil inside her teenage heart. She glanced up at Roberts, searching his face for judgment or anger, but all she found was kindness. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to speak openly about the night she fled her home. "I didn't plan it," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not really, I just snapped. One moment I was lying in bed thinking about how much I hated everything, and the next I was packing my bag and climbing out the window." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I knew if I stayed I'd suffocate. My parents were always fighting and no one ever noticed me. Not truly. I felt like I didn't exist." Roberts nodded slowly, jotting down notes without interrupting. He could hear the pain in her voice, even after 20 years. "What happened after you left?" he asked gently. "Where did you go?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but something about Roberts's calm demeanor encouraged her to keep going. "At first I hitchhiked," she admitted. "I didn't know where I was going, I just wanted to get as far away as possible. I slept in bus stations, abandoned buildings, anywhere I could find shelter. I worked odd jobs when I could, washing dishes or cleaning floors. Eventually I ended up here. People didn't ask too many questions, and I liked that. I changed my name to Sarah because I wanted to leave Emily behind forever." She looked down at her hands, which were clasped tightly together on the table. "It wasn't easy," she continued. "There were days when I thought about going back, but I convinced myself it would only make things worse. So I kept moving forward, pretending I was someone else entirely." Roberts leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. Her story was both heartbreaking and inspiring, a testament to survival against overwhelming odds. Yet there was still so much he needed to understand. "Why didn't you reach out to your family over the years?" he asked. "Even if you couldn't go back, wouldn't you have wanted to let them know you were okay?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, threatening to spill over. "I thought about it," she confessed. "But every time I imagined calling them or writing a letter, I froze. What would I say? 'Hi, Mom and Dad, remember me? The girl who ran away because you ignored her?'" She shook her head bitterly. "Besides, I was scared. Scared they'd hate me for leaving. Scared they'd drag me back into a life I couldn't handle anymore. And honestly, Detective, I was scared of facing them, facing myself." Her words hung heavy in the air, raw and unfiltered. Roberts didn't push further. Instead, he gave her a moment to collect herself before asking his final question. "Do you want to reconnect with them now? Is that something you're ready for?" Sarah stared out the window, watching her children play tag with other kids in the park across the street. Lily's laughter rang out like music while Ben chased after her with boundless energy. Seeing them reminded her of what she'd gained by running away, but also of what she'd lost. "I don't know," she said softly. "Part of me wants to, but another part is terrified. What if they've moved on? What if they don't forgive me?" Roberts placed a reassuring hand on hers. "You won't know unless you try," he said simply. Your family has been waiting for answers for 20 years. They deserve closure, and so do you." Back in Sarah's hometown, news of the discovery spread quickly among her family. Her parents, now elderly and frail, clung to each other as they absorbed the information Roberts had shared over the phone. Their daughter was alive. She hadn't been kidnapped or harmed. She had simply chosen to start a new life. While relief washed over them, it was accompanied by guilt and regret. Had they driven her away? Could they have done more to save her? Her siblings, Rachel and Mark, reacted differently. Rachel cried openly, overwhelmed by a mix of joy and frustration. "All these years we thought she was dead," she exclaimed to her husband late one night. "And now we find out she's been living happily somewhere else? How does that even happen?" Mark, on the other hand, struggled with anger. "She left us," he muttered under his breath during a family meeting. "She didn't trust us enough to stick around. Doesn't that mean anything?" Their conflicting emotions mirrored those of their parents, creating an atmosphere thick with tension. Despite this, everyone agreed on one thing. They needed to see Emily, Sarah, in person. Whether it was to apologize, demand answers, or simply hug her, they couldn't ignore the opportunity fate had handed them. A week later, the family gathered at a rented cabin near the town where Sarah lived. Roberts had arranged the meeting, ensuring it would take place on neutral ground. As they waited anxiously for her arrival, memories flooded back, both good and bad. Rachel flipped through an old photo album, pointing out pictures of Emily as a child riding a bike, blowing out birthday candles, smiling shyly at the camera. Each image stung a little more than the last, reminding them of the happy times they'd taken for granted. When Sarah finally arrived, escorted by Roberts, the scene was electric. She stood awkwardly at the doorway, clutching her grandmother's locket in one hand and a tissue in the other. Her siblings recognized her immediately, though time had altered her appearance. Her parents, however, seemed unsure, squinting through watery eyes as if trying to reconcile the woman before them with the frightened teenager who had vanished into the night. "Emily?" her mother whispered, rising shakily from her chair. "It's Sarah now?" she corrected gently, stepping closer. "But yes, it's me." For several minutes, no one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Rachel broke the silence by rushing forward and pulling Sarah into a tight embrace. "We missed you so much," she sobbed, holding on as if afraid Sarah might disappear again. Mark followed suit, albeit more hesitantly, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. Even their parents joined in, tears streaming down their faces as they murmured apologies and declarations of love. The reunion was emotional yet complicated. Old wounds reopened as they talked late into the night, piecing together fragments of their shared history. Sarah explained why she left, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. Her family listened intently, occasionally interjecting with explanations of their own. They admitted they hadn't been perfect parents or siblings, acknowledging the mistakes they'd made along the way. As dawn approached, Sarah realized something important. Forgiveness wouldn't come overnight. Healing would take time, for all of them. But for the first time in 20 years, she felt hopeful. Perhaps running away hadn't erased her past, but it had given her the strength to confront it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days following the reunion were a whirlwind of emotions for Sarah, once Emily, and her family. They stayed at the rented cabin near her adopted town, spending hours talking, laughing, and occasionally crying as they navigated the complexities of reconnecting after 20 years apart. The air was thick with unspoken questions, lingering guilt, and tentative hope. For Sarah, it felt like stepping into a dream she hadn't dared to imagine, one where the people she'd left behind still cared enough to welcome her back. Her parents, frail but determined, sat beside her on the couch one evening, their hands trembling as they reached out to hold hers. "We're so sorry, sweetheart," her mother said, her voice cracking under the weight of 2 decades worth of regret. "We failed you. We should have done better." Sarah looked at them, her heart aching with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to lash out, to scream about all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, all the times she'd felt invisible in her own home. But another part of her understood that her parents weren't monsters. They were flawed humans who had made mistakes. She took a deep breath before responding. "I know you tried," she said softly. "But sometimes trying isn't enough." Her father nodded, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You're right. It wasn't enough. But we want to make things right now, if you'll let us." For a moment, no one spoke. The silence between them was heavy yet meaningful, filled with unspoken promises and fragile beginnings. Slowly, Sarah squeezed their hands, offering a small smile. "Let's take it one step at a time," she suggested. "That's all any of us can do." Rachel and Mark, Sarah's older siblings, struggled in different ways to process her return. Rachel, ever the emotional one, clung to Sarah as though afraid she might vanish again. She bombarded her with questions about her life over the past 20 years, eager to fill in the gaps left by her absence. "What was it like? Were you scared? Did you think about us?" she asked during a quiet afternoon when they sat together on the porch sipping tea. Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Some days were harder than others," she admitted. "There were times when I thought about calling you guys, but I didn't know what to say. I guess I just convinced myself it was easier to stay away." Rachel frowned, her eyes filling with tears. "Easier for who, Em? Not for us. Do you have any idea how much we worried? How guilty we felt for not noticing sooner that something was wrong?" Sarah sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I didn't expect you to notice," she said honestly. "You were busy with your own lives. Looking back, I realize I shut everyone out, even you two. Maybe if I hadn't been so stubborn." Mark, sitting silently nearby, interrupted before she could finish. "Stop blaming yourself," he snapped, his tone sharper than intended. When both women turned to look at him, he softened slightly. "Look, I get it. You were hurt and you needed to leave, but don't sit there acting like this is all on you. We messed up too. All of us did." His words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Sarah stared at him, surprised by his candor. Though Mark had always been the quieter sibling, his protectiveness toward her had never wavered, even after she disappeared. Now, seeing the pain etched across his face, she realized how deeply her departure had affected him. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally. "I never meant to hurt anyone." Mark shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Doesn't matter now," he muttered. "What matters is figuring out what happens next." Detective Roberts observed these interactions from a distance, feeling a mix of pride and melancholy. He had spent years chasing leads and piecing together fragments of Emily's story, and now that he had brought her family back together, he couldn't help but reflect on the bittersweet nature of closure. Families weren't perfect. They argued, they made mistakes, and sometimes they fell apart. But they also had the capacity to heal, even when the wounds seemed impossible to mend. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills surrounding the cabin, Roberts approached Sarah while she stood alone on the porch gazing out at the landscape. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "It's overwhelming," she admitted, "but I think it's good for all of us, even if it's hard." Roberts nodded, leaning against the railing beside her. "Do you plan to stay in touch with them once this is over?" he asked. "Or will you go back to your old life?" Sarah hesitated, chewing on her lower lip as she considered the question. "I don't know yet," she confessed. "Part of me wants to keep living as Sarah, with Jack and the kids. But another part feels like I owe it to my family to try again. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," Roberts assured her. "There's no rule book for situations like this. You've already shown incredible strength by facing your past. Whatever decision you make moving forward, trust that it's the right one for you." His words comforted her, though uncertainty lingered in her mind. Could she truly reconcile her two identities, the girl who fled her hometown and the woman who built a new life elsewhere? Or would she forever feel torn between worlds? As the week drew to a close, the family gathered for one final meal together before heading their separate ways. The atmosphere was bittersweet, tinged with both sadness and gratitude. Sarah watched, her parents laugh at an old memory shared by Rachel, their faces lighting up in a way she hadn't seen in years. Mark cracked a rare joke, earning groans and chuckles from around the table. Despite the lingering scars of their shared history, they were finding moments of joy, a reminder that healing was possible, even after so much time. After dinner, Sarah pulled out the locket her grandmother had given her, holding it up to catch the fading sunlight. Her siblings leaned in curiously as she opened it, revealing the faded photograph inside. "This kept me going," she explained quietly. "Whenever I felt lost, I held on to it. It reminded me of who I used to be and who I could become." Rachel reached out to touch the locket, her fingers brushing against its cool surface. "You're stronger than you think, Em," she said softly. "Always have been." Sarah smiled, closing the locket and tucking it back into her pocket. For the first time in years, she believed those words might actually be true. Before leaving the cabin, Sarah promised her family she would stay in touch. They exchanged phone numbers and addresses, vowing to visit each other soon. As they hugged goodbye, Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Forgiveness and understanding took time. But she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. Back at home, Jack greeted her with open arms, sensing the emotional toll the reunion had taken. "How did it go?" he asked, pulling her close. "It was complicated," Sarah replied, resting her head against his chest. "But I think it went well. Better than I expected." Jack kissed the top of her head, offering silent support. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you," he murmured. "Always." Lily and Ben bounded into the room, eager to hear about their mom's trip. Sarah knelt down to hug them tightly, grateful for the love and stability they represented. In that moment, surrounded by her chosen family, she realized something important. Running away hadn't erased her past, but it had taught her how to build a future worth fighting for, and perhaps she thought that was enough. Life began to settle into a new rhythm for Sarah, or Emily, as she navigated the delicate balance between her past and present. The reunion with her family had stirred up emotions she hadn't anticipated, forcing her to confront memories she'd spent years trying to bury. Yet, amidst the chaos of reconnecting with her parents and siblings, she found moments of unexpected peace, like phone calls with her mother late at night or playful video chats with Lily and Ben that included her nieces and nephews on the other. And her parents, now more aware of the pain they'd caused, made genuine efforts to rebuild their relationship with her. They sent letters filled with updates about their lives, along with heartfelt apologies and expressions of love. At first, Sarah hesitated to respond, unsure how to bridge the gap between who she was now and the girl she used to be. But over time, she began writing back, sharing snippets of her life as Sarah while cautiously revisiting pieces of her identity as Emily. Each letter brought them closer, healing wounds that had festered for decades. Rachel, always the emotional glue of the family, became Sarah's closest confidant during this period. They talked almost daily, exchanging stories about everything from childhood antics to current struggles. Rachel often joked that she was making up for lost time, but there was an underlying seriousness to her tone. She wanted to ensure Sarah felt supported, not just as a sister but as a person who deserved understanding and care. Mark, on the other hand, took longer to warm up. While he never doubted his love for his little sister, he struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, distant teenager she'd been with the strong, resilient woman she'd become. He expressed his frustration openly during one of their conversations, admitting that he still felt guilty for not noticing her pain sooner. "I should have protected you," he said gruffly, his voice thick with emotion. "That's what big brothers are supposed to do." Sarah placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, her expression softening. "You can't blame yourself for something I didn't tell anyone," she replied gently. We all carry our burdens differently. What matters is that we're here now, talking, listening, and trying to move forward together. Meanwhile, Jack watched silently as Sarah juggled her dual identities. He admired her strength but worried about the toll it might take on her. Late one evening, as they sat side by side on the couch after putting the kids to bed, he finally voiced his concerns. "Are you sure you're ready for all of this?" he asked, gesturing toward the pile of letters and photographs scattered across the coffee table. "It's okay if you need space, you know. You don't have to rush anything." Sarah leaned into him, grateful for his unwavering support. "I'm not rushing," she assured him. "But I also can't pretend my past doesn't exist anymore. These people, they're part of me. Ignoring them won't make that go away." Jack nodded thoughtfully, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself through all of this," he said. "You've already been through so much. Don't let anyone, including your family, make you feel like you owe them more than you're willing to give." His words resonated deeply with Sarah, reminding her that forgiveness didn't mean sacrificing her own well-being. She resolved to set boundaries where necessary, ensuring that her journey toward reconciliation remained healthy and balanced. Detective Roberts, nearing retirement, kept tabs on the situation from afar. Though his role in the case had officially ended, he couldn't help but feel invested in its outcome. Every now and then, he'd call Sarah to check in, asking how things were progressing. During one such conversation, she thanked him profusely for bringing her family back together. "I don't think I would have had the courage to reach out without your help," she admitted. "You gave me a chance to face my past head-on." Roberts chuckled warmly, touched by her gratitude. "All I did was follow the clues," he said modestly. "The real work, the hard part, was yours. You faced your fears, and that's something no one else could have done for you." Their talks grew less frequent over time, but Roberts continued to reflect on the impact of the case long after it was closed. It reminded him why he'd chosen this line of work in the first place. Not just to solve mysteries, but to bring people closure when they needed it most. As weeks turned into months, Sarah decided to visit her hometown again, this time with Jack and the kids in tow. The idea frightened her initially. Returning to the place where so many painful memories lingered felt daunting. But she knew it was an important step in reclaiming her story. If she could face her old home without flinching, perhaps she could finally lay some ghosts to rest. The trip was bittersweet. Driving through familiar streets evoked a flood of nostalgia, from the park where she used to play as a child to the diner where she'd worked her first job. Her parents greeted her warmly, their eyes lighting up at the sight of their grandchildren. For Lily and Ben, the visit was a whirlwind of excitement. They marveled at the sprawling backyard, explored every corner of the house, and peppered their grandparents with endless questions. One afternoon, Sarah stood alone in her childhood bedroom, taking in the faded wallpaper and creaky floorboards. So much had changed since the last time she'd been here, yet certain details remained eerily untouched. On impulse, she climbed onto the bed and pressed her palm against the ceiling above. It was the same spot where she used to lie awake at night, dreaming of escape. A lump formed in her throat as she realized how far she'd come since those dark days. Later that evening, sitting around the dining table with her entire family gathered together, Sarah raised a toast. "To second chances," she said, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "And to the people who remind us that we're stronger than we think." Everyone clinked glasses, laughter filling the room as plates were passed and stories were shared. In that moment, surrounded by the people she loved most, Sarah felt a profound sense of belonging, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She realized that running away hadn't erased her past, nor had it defined her future. Instead, it had taught her resilience, courage, and the importance of choosing her own path. By the time they returned home, Sarah felt lighter, as though a weight she'd carried unknowingly for years had finally lifted. She continued to stay in touch with her family, cherishing the newfound connection while maintaining the life she'd built with Jack and the kids. The locket, once a symbol of her grandmother's love, now represented something even greater: the power of forgiveness, redemption, and the courage to embrace both sides of herself. Though challenges lay ahead, Sarah approached them with renewed hope. She understood now that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but learning to live alongside it. And as she tucked her children into bed each night, whispering stories of adventures yet to come, she knew she was exactly where she was, meant to be. Months passed, and Sarah's life settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. She had learned to embrace the duality of her identity: Emily, the girl who fled her hometown in search of freedom, and Sarah, the woman who built a loving family far from the shadows of her past. Each day brought small victories: a heartfelt phone call with her mother, a playful video chat with her siblings' children, or quiet moments at home where she could reflect on how far she'd come. Her parents, though still frail, seemed to have found a renewed sense of purpose. They spoke often about their gratitude for having Emily back in their lives, even if it was under different circumstances. Her mother mailed her handmade quilts every few weeks, each stitched with patterns, inspired by memories from Sarah's childhood. "I want you to have something tangible," she wrote in one letter. "Something to remind you that no matter what name you go by, you'll always be my daughter." Sarah cherished those gifts, draping the quilts over the couch in her living room where they became part of her daily life. To her, they symbolized not just her mother's love, but also the bridge she was slowly building between her two worlds. Jack noticed the change in her demeanor too. Gone was the guardedness that used to creep into her eyes when certain topics arose. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made him proud. Rachel remained her steadfast ally, calling regularly to share updates about their parents and swap stories about their kids. "It's like we're making up for all those years apart," Rachel said during one conversation. "Only now we get to do it as adults who actually understand each other." Their bond deepened with every shared laugh and tearful confession, proving that some connections can withstand even the longest separations. Mark, however, continued to grapple with his feelings. Though he tried to mask his struggles behind jokes and casual banter, Sarah could see the lingering guilt in his eyes whenever they spoke. One evening, during a rare visit to her hometown, she decided to address it directly. Sitting beside him on the porch, she placed a hand on his arm and said softly, "You don't have to keep punishing yourself, Mark. I'm here now, aren't I? That's what matters." He looked at her, his jaw tightening as if fighting back tears. "But what if I hadn't failed you back then?" he asked hoarsely. "What if I'd noticed how unhappy you were? Maybe none of this would have happened." Sarah sighed, shaking her head. "We can't rewrite the past," she replied firmly. "All we can do is move forward, and we are, together." Her words struck a chord, and though it would take time for Mark to fully forgive himself, he began to let go of some of the weight he'd been carrying. Their relationship grew stronger as they worked through their emotions side by side, learning to support each other without judgment. Detective Roberts, now officially retired, spent his days tending to his garden and reflecting on the cases that had shaped his career. Of all the mysteries he'd solved, Emily's disappearance stood out most vividly in his mind, not because of its complexity, but because of its humanity. He often thought about how brave Sarah had been to face her past head-on, and he took pride in knowing he'd played a role in bringing her family back together. Occasionally, he'd receive postcards from her, filled with updates about her life and expressions of gratitude. "You gave me a second chance," she wrote in one note. "And because of that, I've been able to give myself permission to heal." Each message warmed his heart, reminding him why he'd dedicated so many years to helping others find closure. As he sat on his porch one sunny afternoon, flipping through old photographs of Emily's case, he realized something profound. Justice wasn't always about catching criminals or solving crimes. It was about restoring hope, mending broken bonds, and giving people the tools to rebuild their lives. Back in her adopted town, Sarah embraced the challenges of blending her old and new identities. She introduced Jack and the kids to her biological family via video calls, creating a patchwork of relationships that spanned generations and miles. For Lily and Ben, the concept of extended family was thrilling. They adored hearing stories about their mom's childhood and eagerly anticipated visits to their grandparents' house. One summer weekend, Sarah organized a family reunion at a lakeside cabin, a neutral space where everyone could gather without the emotional baggage of their hometown. The event was a mix of laughter, tears, and heartfelt conversations. Her parents marveled at how much the grandchildren had grown, while Rachel and Mark bonded with Jack over shared hobbies and inside jokes. Even the kids got along famously, splashing in the water and roasting marshmallows around the campfire. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah stood on the dock overlooking the lake. The locket hung around her neck, its cool metal surface brushing against her collarbone as she gazed at the reflection of the stars dancing across the water. Behind her, she could hear the faint hum of voices, her family coming together in ways she'd once thought impossible. Jack joined her a moment later, slipping an arm around her waist. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. She smiled, leaning into him. "Like maybe, just maybe, everything will be okay," she replied. "It's not perfect, and it probably never will be. But that's okay. Life isn't supposed to be perfect, it's supposed to be real, and this—" She gestured toward the cabin where laughter echoed into the night. "This feels real." In the months that followed, Sarah continued to honor both parts of her journey. She framed the torn photograph Detective Roberts had discovered in the junkyard, placing it alongside pictures of her children and husband. It served as a reminder of how far she'd come and the strength it had taken to confront her past. Her story became a testament to resilience, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Running away hadn't erased her pain, but it had given her the distance she needed to heal. Returning home hadn't undone the mistakes of her family, but it had allowed them to begin anew, choosing forgiveness over resentment. On a crisp autumn morning, as Sarah walked her children to school, she paused to watch the leaves swirl in the breeze. Life wasn't without its challenges, but she faced them with courage and grace, knowing she wasn't alone. Whether as Emily or Sarah, she had finally found her place in the world, a place where love, forgiveness, and redemption intertwined to create something beautiful, and perhaps she thought that was enough.